I was asked to come and talk, and the main reason I did that is because I'm actually a Spartan. So, I went to San Jose State, and I was in the religious studies department, and I also did work in the philosophy department with Andrew Ward, and benefited greatly from him. I don't know if he's still there, but I also had an incredible teacher while I was there. I think generally in school, you usually have one or two really amazing teachers, and then all the other ones, you're wondering what you're doing in the class, wasting your time, because you could be actually reading something more interesting somewhere else. But good teachers they have an amazing impact on you, and the person that I was really impacted there by was Ken Kramer, who was in the religious studies department. Just a really extraordinary person who brought so much presence into his classroom in teaching. And that's the great gift of teachers, is that when they're good, they bring presence into the classroom, and they're really there. Ezra Pound said that if you're not excited about teaching a book, if you're not as excited about teaching that book the first time you taught it, then you shouldn't be teaching it. And to have a teacher like that is a great gift, and that was one of the gifts I think that I had. I spent a lot of time with him, and he actually used to have me give the lectures on his Islamic sections, because he also taught Islam. And Freydun was there one time, and Freydun asked him about that, and he said, well, I don't want to teach Islam if I've got Hamza here. And that was just from his humility and generosity, because he was well versed in and quite capable of teaching at the undergraduate level. But what I want to talk about tonight is something that Dr. Omar Abdullah Farouk mentions in his paper, which is really worth reading for, I think, all the Muslims, which is Living Islam with Purpose. And he talked about the operational principles that our community needed to be committed to. And those operational principles that Dr. Omar mentions are principles that he says should really be the foundation of the Islamic community in the United States. The first one was trusting reason. One of the things that I think a lot of Muslims are unaware of in the modern period, they assume somehow that reason was a school called the Mu'tazilite. That was the school of reason. And the Mu'tazilite were defeated by the defenders of faith. And so unfortunately a lot of what you see out there being presented as Islam is often devoid of reason. It's what they call naql without aql. It's having the transmission without having the intellect that goes with it. And it's a big problem in our community. So we get a lot of really ridiculous things that Muslims come up with.
Thank you.
And a lot of what you're seeing in the Muslim world from these so-called Muslim groups and organizations and leaders has nothing to do with our tradition. It's actually a completely misguided approach to Islam. The dominant schools of Islam, all of them held that you needed reason with revelation. You could not have one without the other. And so trusting reason and the idea that Islam is a rational tradition, it's founded on rationality, that we actually believe that the Quran is a book that gives us arguments. There's a lot of people that say one of the things that atheists talk about, and our scholars debated about circularity in theology, but one of the things that a lot of atheists drive them mad about religious people is they say, why do you believe in the Bible? Because it's from God. How do you know it's from God? Because it's in the Bible. And so this type of circular reasoning really drives the rationalist mad. But if you actually look at the Quran, Imam al-Ghazali wrote a book called The Just Balance, Al-Qistas al-Mustaqim. And in that book he shows that there are 22 rational arguments that God presents in the Quran for why you should actually believe in the Quran and why you should believe in God and why you should believe in resurrection. And they're actually set up, according to Imam al-Ghazali, in the 5 golden syllogistic approaches of rational thought. And he proves this in his book. And makes a strong argument that the Quran is actually, it's a dialectic with humanity. It's challenging people to actually think about these arguments. And it reasons with them. The Quran doesn't just say believe, but it actually gives you reasons to believe. Why you should believe. The Quran says, do you think that you just were created from nothing and there's no meaning to your life? أَيَحْسِبُ الْإِنسَانُ أَنْ يُتْرَكَ? Do you think the human being is just going to be created and that's it? And then you die? And it's just going to be like the people that say, نَمُوتُ وَنَحْيَا وَمَا يُهْلِكُنَا إِلَّا الدَّهْرُ. We die and we live. You know, we have people die the generations before, and then new ones come, and it's just materialism. That's the only thing that's affecting us, is time itself. The materialistic approach. So the Quran makes all of these arguments. And then fiqh is a rational project. The ulama always used reason. The basis of fiqh is reason. And they make all these arguments of why you should do this. And they have maqasid, they have the 6 universals. And every Islamic law goes under one of these 6 reasons. So the prohibition of alcohol is to protect the intellect. The prohibition of usury is, in fact, Fakhruddin al-Razi gives 5 rational reasons why usury is prohibited. And one of them is the boom-bust cycle, because the Quran actually refers to a boom-bust cycle when it says that people that do usury are like people that get up and then fall down again. Like as if they've been afflicted by a demon. The greed makes them fall into these patterns of boom-bust, because they know that eventually usury by its very nature is going to create these cycles. The other reason that Fakhruddin gives about usury, on the prohibition of usury, is he says that it encourages a type of financial adventurism that doesn't involve risk. And so what happens is, because people can make money by lending their money, they actually don't do things that are difficult to do or risky. And you can see this beautifully articulated in The Merchant of Venice, when Antonio, who's risking everything with his ships, and the usurer he's just staying at home loaning his money out to people who aren't risking their money. He's not risking his money. And Shakespeare makes a very interesting dialectic in there about these 2 approaches to wealth. So, trusting reason, he says, is really important for our community. One of the things that Poston showed in a book about da'wah in America, this is a Christian researcher that studied Islamic conversion in the United States. And one of the things that he found is that people in America that convert, one of the main reasons they give is that Islam was much more rational than the religions they had before. It actually made sense to them. And yet, unfortunately, some of the converts, once they get into Islam, they actually fall victim to the most irrational approaches to Islam. The idea that you could harm somebody, like an innocent person, that you could harm an innocent person because the end justifies the means. Something very alien to the Islamic tradition, but unfortunately we have young converts that have fallen into this. Goes against everything. The second thing is that he said, an operational principle, meaning something that we apply, it's operative in our communities, is respecting dissent. Again, there is a type of Islam that has emerged that really comes across as an Islam that doesn't allow dissenting opinions. This is the way it is, brother. This is God's ruling. This is what God says. You're going against what God says? The vast majority of what we have in our religion is actually what we think God probably meant in the Quran. It's not what God meant. It's what we think He meant. And this is why our scholars differentiated between what are called presumptive proofs and decisive proofs. A qat'i and a dhanni. The vast majority of Islamic legal rulings are presumptive. They're not decisive. And for that reason, when situations arise where you get these differences of opinion, the scholars will not take one or the other, or they'll choose one. So they'll either leave you the option of taking this, that, or the other, A, B, or C, or they'll say, I think this is a stronger opinion, or they'll say, this is definitely a stronger opinion, and this is a weak opinion. So they'll have weak opinions. But an interesting principle in our tradition is that if a weak opinion becomes the practice of the people, then our fuqaha has said it should be left alone, because it will cause tribulation in the community to try to redress it. So we get these self-righteous people that want to come into the community and say, you can't do that, that's a bid'ah, or that's this, or your proof is weak. But it's the practice of the people. And this is why in Andalusia, for instance, they used to raise their hands in dua, right, after the prayer. In the Maliki madhab, that's considered a weak position, that the imam shouldn't make dua after the prayer. That's the preferred position. But the ulama of Andalusia said it's become so widespread that to try to stop people to do this would actually create dissension amongst the brothers and sisters. And so it'll cause the hearts to become averse to actually going to the masjid. Another one they mention is putting the feet next to each other. One of the early, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani said, one of the Sahaba said that, and he was a young boy when they did this, they said that we used to put our feet next to each other behind the Prophet ﷺ. And then he said, now if somebody did it today, the other guy would move away from you. That was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So there's an example of maybe they did it as a practice, but it never became normative amongst the Muslims. And so for people to get that hadith and try to apply it today and force other people to follow it is actually going against the spirit of Islam. But this is the type of ignorance that we have in our community, because we have all these weekend muftis. Really, we have all these weekend muftis, and they're proliferating. I don't even want to be called sheikh anymore, because there's so many sheikhs now that it's really, so from today I want to be referred to as colonel. Okay, because I'm actually a Kentucky colonel. It's a lot harder to become a colonel today than it is to become a sheikh. So just trusting reason is very important, and respecting dissent. Those two, if we could just take those as operational principles in our community, it would resolve a lot of problems. Another thing that he said is stressing societal obligations. And what he means by that is our scholars divided obligations, the wajibat, into two types. Fara'id al-kifaya and fara'id al-ayn. Fara'id al-kifaya are collective obligations. Fara'id al-ayn are those individual obligations. Now, one of the problems in our community is there's so much devotional focus on the individual obligations that all of the collective obligations have been neglected. So we've forgotten that we have collective obligations. For instance, taking care of the needy in your community. That is a collective obligation of a society. You should take care of the needy. Right now, there's people on the East Coast that need help. If you saw the woman from Staten Island screaming out, "We're going to die," she wasn't joking. Staten Island was devastated by this event, and the head of Staten Island Borough came on the news and also made a plea, and it had a reaction because Obama made a personal phone call. They actually sent in FEMA. They started helping them. But that is an obligation on the community to help an area that's distressed or in need. People have a right, what's called haqq al-inqadh in our tradition, the right to be saved. We actually believe that healthcare is a right. So this idea that that people that it's a privilege, no. It's a right, and that is why in this country, despite whether people know this or not, You cannot turn away somebody from an ER because they don't have insurance or something like that. But what's happened is the ERs are becoming primary care clinics because so many poor people show up at the ER facilities for primary care. So it's a crisis. That comes from the neglect of physicians in private clinics that aren't taking a certain number of the indigent. Bill and Charlie Mayo of the famous Mayo Clinic, 30% of all of their patients were treated de gratis, for free, because that was part of the American tradition, that being a physician was a vocation, that you actually had to help other people. But in an age of Ayn Rand's philosophy, right, when Ayn Rand becomes some kind of serious philosopher, I mean, this is like, if you've ever seen or interviewed, like if I was doing an alien movie and she walked in and I was casting, I would just think, wow, no makeup. I've got an alien. I mean, she's just such a strange being and very, very weird philosophy. If anybody's ever attempted to read The Fountainhead, I don't know. I mean, supposedly it's a bestseller in America, but so is 50 Shades of Grey. So it's not saying a whole lot about America. I mean, my America, Shirley Temple's a little before my time, but I did see Shirley Temple movies as a boy. And it's a long way from Honey Boo Boo. I kind of miss Shirley Temple, to be honest with you. This kind of dignified little girl that acted like an adult. And now we have, these spastic children with parents that are acting like spastic children as well. It's just become so surreal, this whole thing out there. I don't know what's going on. But we have to ask ourselves how we went from Leave It to Beaver to Beavis and Butthead. How did that happen? What happened in America? Why has this culture become so degraded? So anyway, the collective responsibility. This is something this is part of what we're doing here. Because we tend to forget, and I really think we as a community in the Bay Area, we should make it a priority to make the Bay Area the #1 center for Islamic studies, not in the United States. I say reach for the stars. In the whole world. And that means money to be endowed. San Jose State. We already had the Abbasis, may Allah reward them, giving the endowment at Stanford. Amazing. It's a lot of money, really. We have the GTU, the Graduate Theological Union. We've got Munir Jiwa, Dr. Munir Jiwa's there. We should support the Islamic Studies Department at the GTU to see that build into a really world-class Department of Islamic Studies. They have a joint program with Berkeley, so they have access with the Berkeley facilities. The language facilities at Berkeley are stunning. We could really be producing some amazing scholars. San Jose State is the oldest university in the United States, in California. It's the oldest one in California. And San Jose State, Berkeley started in 1864 with 40 students and 10 instructors. 40 students and 10 instructors. Today they have 40,000 employees, and their yearly budget is about $11 billion. And they're a powerhouse. Berkeley produces people that go into the State Department. They produce people that go into the administration, to the cabinet itself. They've got a professor there now teaching economics that was the Secretary of Labor. Right, exactly. So these are institutions that impact the society because they've been built. And so looking at our societal obligations, we have to see one of the main collective obligations in this country is for us to establish Islamic institutions and also to make sure that the existing institutions have qualified and well-run Islamic departments. Because for too long, Islam has been marginalized into a certain religious studies center where they had people that weren't really qualified to be teaching Islam. And people that had their degrees, for instance, in Jewish studies, they would just be, oh, that's near Islam. Can you do a course on Islam? Sure. You know, so you have, or somebody who did Buddhist studies, Buddhism, yeah, that's one of those religions over there, Eastern religion. Can you do Islam? No, we need schools that have trained people. Because Islam is a very extensive and difficult study. It's not easy to really learn Islam as you should. And then the next operational principle that he argues is the idea of stressing priorities. And this is what our tradition called ilm al-muwazana in the past. Fiqh al-awlawiyat is what they use today. The idea of triaging. What are the most important things? And we had a system of doing this. Darurat, hajiyat, tahsiniyat. Our scholars articulated a beautiful system of necessities, needs, embellishments. Necessities, needs, embellishments. That you should always prioritize necessities. And then you go to, when the necessities are taken care of, you go to the needs. When the needs are taken care of, you go to the embellishments. So an example, just an example, they use the example of a house. People need shelter, especially in areas where it's cold. So you can have a door and that's enough. That's a necessity just to get in the house. But a need is to have windows. And then the embellishment is to have curtains. Because that's part of what humans do, is they embellish their lives. Because we're people of ihsan. We like beauty. Allah has made us to love beauty. And so this is why, historically, things were done to change the atmosphere. You don't really need these things, but we do them. These are embellishments. I mean, everybody has different aesthetic tastes, right? I'm more of kind of classical approach to architecture and things. But, you know, gaudy has its lovers as well, you know. So there was a mansion I saw once built by, I won't say from which country, but from a Muslim country. We'll draw the veil of generosity over them. And they were down in LA, and they put flesh-colored, instead of having the white marble nude statues, they had them painted flesh-colored. And the neighbors were really bothered by it. You know? But, right, some people like gaudy, right? In fact, the guy was from a country that rhymes with gaudy. Anyway. And then the last operative principle was embracing our legal maxims. And one of the most intriguing aspects of the Islamic tradition is that the Muslims, they developed an approach to Islamic law that facilitated being able to apply in any given circumstance a ruling based on these overarching universal principles. And this is one of the great accomplishments. And one of the most amazing things about the legal maxims is that about 40 of them, and certainly 20, are almost entirely agreed upon by all of our Muslim jurists, whether they're Shia or Sunni. They agree on these maxims. And so they apply these maxims. One of them, and the most important, is al-umur bi maqasidiha, that the reason you do things is because you have aims and purposes. The reason you do things is for aims and purposes. For instance, if you look in the old books of fiqh, there's something called inghimas al-adu. Inghimas al-jundi fil-adu. It's for a soldier when he's on a battlefield to run into the enemy, like just charge in, even if it's possible that he would die. That's something that's mentioned in the books of fiqh when you look in jihad. If you look at the maqsad of that, the aim or the purpose, Imam Asawi says, commenting on that this was in order for the enemy to see the power and the beauty of Islam. لِيُرِيهِمْ قُوَّةَ الْإِسْلَامِ وَشَمَالَ الْإِسْلَامِ فِي شَجَاعَةِ الْجُنْدِ. So that he could see the beauty of Islam in the courage of the soldier. And this was something that historically the people that the Muslims came up against and fought were always in awe of their courage on the battlefield. Now you have a situation where people will take that principle and they will apply it to getting on a bus and blowing up a bunch of innocent civilians. So there's absolutely no understanding there. Or you could look at the apostasy laws, which historically were to protect Islam and to protect people and their faith. Now they have the effect of alienating people from Islam. But if you don't have a way of understanding your religion that is intelligent and intelligible, then you end up doing the most heinous things. Something a Western philosopher said, it takes evil people to do evil, right? For the sake of evil, right? But it takes it takes evil people to do evil, but it takes religion to make good people do evil. Right? But I wouldn't say it takes religion to make good people do evil. It takes bad religion to make good people evil religion. Because there is evil religion. There is understandings that are shar. And in fact, the Prophet used that word. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when he said he needed to get the zakat from the people, he said, Hada khayr. When he wrote the book down, he said, Hada khayr. This is good. There's also shar. There's evil. There's good and evil. There's maslaha and mafsada. There's benefit and harm. So it's really important. Now, the second one is the idea that harm should be removed. Harm should be removed. That's a maxim in our tradition. Ad-darar yuzal. The Prophet ﷺ said, La darara wa la dirara. There's no harm and there's no reciprocating harm. You should not harm others, nor should you reciprocate harm if it's done to you. If somebody hits you with your car, you don't pull into reverse and smash into their car, because that's reciprocating their harm. Hopefully you get out and exchange insurance. And if he's an illegal, you just relax and recognize that, there are those less fortunate than you in this world. At least you've got somebody to pay for your car to get fixed. That poor guy doesn't, right? And then you don't know his story. And he could have been the guy that was mowing your lawn last week, right? Or he could have been the guy picking those grapes you had for breakfast. There was also, I wanted to mention, I usually don't make any political things, but please vote yes on 37. So, if you don't know about that, it's about the GMOs. And if you look at the amount of money that the corporations have put into creating a false information about this and propaganda, it's amazing. Like, they've spent literally millions and millions of dollars to get people to think that this is a bad thing. But you should know what's going into your body. And that's one of the blessings we have in this country, is that you can petition your government to redress wrongs. And it's a wrong to put things that are potentially harmful into food. And then there's other things that are established as harmful and carcinogenic that are in food. And so we have the right to petition our government, and that's what this is about. So if you haven't voted already, early voters, get out on Tuesday and vote. I don't know who you're going to vote for, but you have to look. Here's another maxim. أَخَفَّ الضَّرَرَيْنِ يُرْتَكِبْ. The lesser of the two evils should be chosen. That's a legal maxim in Islamic law. You have to look at the lesser of the two evils, right? Yeah. Anyway, we have an immense opportunity. We have a lot of wealth in this community. You need to spend your wealth. I'll conclude by just saying this. My experience, and I had the, I don't know if I'll call it an opportunity, but I had the interesting experience of being part of the C100. So for 6 years, they invited me last year and I didn't go by my own choice. But I had the opportunity of going to Davos for 6 years, at the World Economic Forum. And it's an opportunity to mingle with some of the most powerful and wealthiest people on the planet. So I'm going to tell you what happens at the end of this journey for success. Okay? Here's what happens. When you get to the end, you're driving a Mercedes, a BMW, a Lexus, a Jaguar, maybe a Rolls Royce. That's it. There's not that many choices. If you get really, really big, you get your custom-made Mercedes, right? And I was actually in a car with a very wealthy man that when we turned, the seat turned with you. It was very disorienting. But he got used to it. So you'll also, if you're in the Bay Area, you will live up in like these hills up, there's hills over there near Hillsborough. Right? You'll live up there and you'll have neighbors that, you'll kind of wave. You won't know their names, you won't know them, but you'll wave to them, they'll wave back to you. You'll probably have big pillars on your front door, mock imitation of some Greco-Roman ideal, maybe even a little jockey on the lawn, right? Probably not a black one anymore because that's unacceptably politically incorrect, right? The rich people used to have little African-American jockeys on the front lawns, right? But that's what the type of house you have. You'll probably have heated toilet seats because you don't want to have cold bottom, right? So you have heated toilet seats. You'll have like Oliver glasses, Oliver Peoples glasses, really expensive ones. You might even have handmade ones. You'll have a Mont Blanc pen in your pocket. You'll have a Rolex watch or maybe a Cartier or something like that. It's just so predictable. I mean, really, it's so and I'd see one guy after another, and it was the same thing. It was just so predictable. At least, the old people back in the old days, they had their own private tailors, they had, wealth meant something. Now, you're just basically a commercialized clone. You look like everybody else, right? You don't just see a coat like this, right? This one I had made. In Turkey, I have a tailor. Like, I go to Turkey and there's a guy, he's a tailor there. Beautiful man. He prays 5 prayers in the masjid. All the linen is fair trade. It's all fair trade. I don't have to worry about the linen being from some sweatshop somewhere. And these guys, they're a brotherhood. They live in this one little area in Istanbul. And they all pray and fast together and eat together. And I'd go and he would tell me, no, you should have baggier pants. It's not sunnah to those tight pants. I said, I live in America, it's those baggy pants kind of start laughing at you. And I said, anyway, that's urf, goes under urf, because al-'ada muhakkama, that's a legal maxim, that the custom of a people is recognized in Sharia, as long as, right? The Prophet said, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum." If you imitate a people, you're like them, right? But he didn't say "man yushbihul qawm," the one who looks or resembles a people is from them. He said "man tashabbaha." Tashabbaha in Arabic is takallafa. It's you're imitating them because you have an inferiority complex. You want to be like them because you're not. You feel insufficient in yourself, and so you want to look like somebody else. Whereas if you're just wearing the normative clothes of a society, that is not tashabbuh. Because there's another idea that the Arabs say, khalif tu'raf, go against the norm and you stick out like a sore thumb. Right? So this is just using reason. So anyway, That's the end of your wealth. You know, and then you leave it to ungrateful kids. You know, seriously. I mean, just let them earn it like you did. They'll appreciate it more, right? You give it all to them. Because, you know, college in this country used to be, you know, rich men sending their sons to school to kind of render them harmless. And that was the idea, right? And then they started letting poor kids come into school to learn how to become rich, right? So they kind of slowly, and then they call them nouveau riche. I don't really like them. Right? The Great Gatsby, and if you read, there's a wonderful story about that. The Great Gatsby, right? Jay Gatsby. Somebody that, the American dream, which really ends in tragedy. This pursuit, this empty pursuit of wealth, the blinking green light, this empty pursuit of the dollar. Because that's what it is. When Sandy comes, it can take all that stuff away from you. Really. There's people now, they don't have houses, nothing. And you know the thing people haven't thought about? All the rats are coming up. Right? Because there's more rats in New York City underground than there are overground. And there's a lot of them on Wall Street, right? Wearing three-piece suits. Right? But there's more underground than overground. And they're coming up. Because they, you know, they got drowned out. And man, rats survive everything. Okay? Rats, they say it when the nuclear thing comes, it's just the cockroaches and the rats. Everybody else is gone. Right? And it's interesting. So that's it. You know, and you have to decide what you want to do with all that money. Because a lot of you have a lot of money, and if you're where you are, you're comfortable, you know, that's fine. I'm comfortable. If you're comfortable, Sharia allows it as long as you're doing what you should be doing for other people, the collective obligations, because those collective obligations become greater the more wealth you have. The more wealth, the more responsibility. We're not Ayn Randian followers, objectivist philosophy. Selfishness is not in our religion. We don't have that concept. Our Prophet ﷺ did not go to sleep with money in his house. That's his sunnah. You don't have to follow that. He had to do that. And Abu Bakr did the same thing. He followed him. That's why he has the highest maqam. Omar gave half of his wealth. That's why he's Omar. The other people gave a third or a tenth or whatever they gave. But to hoard it, then you're bakhil. And the Prophet said, هَلْ هُنَكَ دَاءٌ أَدْوَى مِنَ الْبُخْلِ? Is there a pathology more pathological than miserliness? Is there a disease or a sickness more pathological than miserliness? In fact, in Arabic, you might have heard this before, but in Arabic, the word for miser is mumsik. Bakhil is one, mumsik is another. It's the same word for constipated. Because wealth is like feces. You have to spread it around in order to get benefit from it. Right? Really, that's what you have to do. It's like feces. You spread it around. Like you take manure and you spread it around and everything grows. But if you keep it all in one place, it's just a massive stench that will drive you mad. So just let it go. Really. Take an iman enema. Just let it go.